Hello and welcome back to our special program on the current plenary sessions of both NPC and the CPCC in Chinese Lianghui. Voices and votes. Thank you for watching. At the beginning of our show today, let us send our best wishes to every lady watching. Happy Women's Day. Foreign Minister Wang Yi has held his annual press conference on the sidelines of the first session of China's 13th National People's Congress and answered more than 20 questions regarding a series of hot global issues. How does he see China's role in world affairs? What will China's foreign policies be in the next few years? And how should we understand China's new type of major country diplomacy? To look at China's foreign policy today, I'm glad to be joined in the Beijing studio by Professor Zhao Daojun from Peking University and Cui Hongjian, researcher at the China Institute of International Studies. We shall also cross over to Dr. Richard White, Director and Senior Fellow with the Center for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute, Washington, and to Dmitry Babich, a political analyst from Sputnik International News Agency. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Gentlemen, what does he mean by the old path of traditional big powers, and what is the uniqueness of China's major country diplomacy? By the way, at the very beginning, let's send our congratulations to women diplomats. How many outstanding, brilliant women diplomats on the center stage today? Can you name some of them?
Yes, exactly. Maybe first name in my mind is Madame Fu Ying, and the former Deputy Minister of the Chinese
and former
Affairs.
spokesperson of the NPC.
Yes, exactly. And also another Madame Zhang, the former spokeswoman with the
former ambassador to Belgium.
Yes.
And senior diplomat in the United States, to have family reunion with her husband, Liu Jieyi, former special envoy of the PRC to the United Nations.
Yeah,
and also spokesperson currently of the foreign ministry.
Yeah, Madame Hua.
Hua Chunying.
Yes, exactly.
We have Chinese lady diplomats. We also have many famous international lady diplomats like Madam Clinton, Hillary Clinton,
right.
A lot of others.
Of course.
And some of, including state leaders of other countries.
And senior women politicians throughout the world. Let's say Happy Women's Day again. Now let's come back to examine the highlights of Foreign Minister Wang Yi's press conference on the sidelines of the two plenary sessions. What are the points that you think are most interesting?
I thought one of the highlights I took away from Minister Wang's conference is he identified the 4 major conferences China is going to organize this year. One on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, one the Boao Forum, and one, I think it was a BRICS conference.
No, it's China-Africa
Corporations. So these 4 workshops tell a lot about the focus of at least, his ministry's job portfolio for the year. The center theme, as I read, is development. It's, we provide a platform for cooperation. And these things pretty much emphasize economic affairs, and also with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, with the recent expansion of membership to include India and Pakistan, and tied to the Belt and Road Initiative. So I thought it tells a lot about what we are trying to achieve. That is a continuation of focus on development and cooperation.
Yeah. But at the very beginning, Foreign Minister Wang Yi addressed the issue of trade war that could happen between the United States and China, the 2 largest economies. Do you think that we're going to have a war between these 2 largest economies?
Yes, I think at the beginning, undoubtedly there will be a very, very, tough attitude from President Trump and the American administration on this trade issue. Not only China, and now almost every major partner of trade with the United States suffered a lot, at the beginning. Because firstly, we find out a very, very tough response from the European Union now towards the forthcoming, the measures by American administration. But I don't think it will happen as expected by President Trump or some other American politicians. If we look at especially how large of this common interest in trade, and I mean not only the goods and also service and also investment, because it's not only an issue, a simple issue with steel or some other production. I don't think so. So I think yes, maybe it's just a first step from President Trump, but perhaps he will make, he has to have a second step after the response from all of the partners, including China.
Diplomacy for whatever major country is not only served to help improve or rebuild the world order one way or another, but is also viewed as an extension of domestic politics.
Just a little bit more about the trade topic. One of the puzzles I have is, although the amount of U.S. import of steel from China last year ranked about number 11, that's about 2% of total U.S. import. And also China produces about 49% of the amount of steel around the world, but we also consume about 45% of the total world total. Then you start to have a question: if the actual tonnage of made in China or exported from China steel that's involved is so small, why all this rhetorical focus, not just from the United States, but also from Europe and elsewhere, that says this is not just steel, it's a U.S.-China matter. There's a lot of things we need to be looking at as a matter of, should we say, both economic and political diplomacy between China and the United States.
China's national defense budget increased by 8%. Now let me cross over to Dmitry Babbage, who's standing by in Europe, and have his comments on what global implications we would have with the rapid rise of China's GDP, national strength, as well as military build-up.
Well, in Russia, the view of China's peaceful rise, as we call it, is very positive because China so far has behaved very responsibly at the world stage in its foreign economic relations. So we welcome the peaceful rise of China. It was very beneficial to the Russian Far East. Let me remind you that when the reforms started in the former Soviet Union, Far East was one of the least developed parts of the former Soviet Union. Now it's a magnet for investment, it's a magnet for population. Some of the biggest projects in Eurasia, such as building the new bridge, the colossal bridge breaking the world's record in Vladivostok, how was that made possible? Well, largely thanks to our neighborly relations with China. China is providing investment. China is providing the market. China is our hope for the future. As far as diplomacy is concerned, please note that Russia and China see eye to eye on the majority of the burning international issues today. On Syria, when our ministers, Sergei Lavrov and Wang Yi, when they meet, there is always a 100% agreement that Syrians should decide their fate themselves. China is one of very few countries that provides an objective picture to its citizens of what's going on in Syria. They are not talking about a peaceful revolution and all the other lies spread by the United States and the EU media. They have been talking about the real danger of Islamist violence in Syria long before the so-called Islamic State officially declared its existence. So basically, if we look at the general picture, China's rise is not raising any concerns in Russia. We welcome this rise. We see it as a hope for humanity, and we are very happy about the diplomatic successes of China. probably it indeed makes sense for China to increase the expenses on its diplomacy.
Thank you so much, Dimitri,
in the Russian press
for all the encouraging descriptions about the nature and importance of this bilateral relationship. But we're not allies, are we? We are very special strategic partners. That's one important hallmark that characterizes the new bilateral relationship between Russia and China in the wake of the Cold War. Well, you mentioned the importance of Far East Siberia for China's investment and the growing business presence there. Now, Siberia is an important part of the Indo-Pacific region. My question for Richard, who's standing by in the D.C., is whether this part of the world, the Indo-Pacific region, is big enough to accommodate the strategic interests of the two biggest economies, China and the United States of America. From the press briefing this morning of Foreign Minister Wang Yi, Richard, what can you tell us about the American concerns?
Well, I think that whereas Dmitry Babrich correctly described the relationship between Russia and China as generally positive, I mean, it hasn't reached its full potential, and certainly the two countries aren't allies. With respect to the U.S., the China-U.S. relationship is much more mixed. There's cooperation in some places and competition in others. So you mentioned the economic dimension in the Indo-Pacific framework. Well, it's clear that China and the U.S. are each other's main economic partners. There's a lot of cooperation in different sectors between our businesses. But there are also companies are rivals in third countries. So in India, in Southeast Asia, in Japan, and in South Korea, and so on, American and U.S. companies will often compete. Under this administration, there are claims that China is competing unfairly, and the U.S. will take responses, and so on. So, but it's a mixed relationship, and that puts it also in contrast with the U.S. relationship with Russia, which is more negative because, unlike with China, we don't have this strong economic ballast, which I would argue helps soothe those or some of the tensions between Beijing and Washington.
Well, there's a lot of discussions about whether trade war is to break out between the two major economies. The other major issue and concern is whether we're going to have the Thucydides trap, meaning in the inevitable clash between the residing power and the rising power. Having said this, one touchstone that may measure or maybe a test of the relationship between Washington and Beijing is the Korean Peninsula. Now, a special delegation has been sent to Pyongyang to negotiate inter-Korean peace talks. What can you tell us about the American concerns, Richard? Do you think Washington is very supportive of this major policy move by President Moon Jae-in?
The U.S. view of this is somewhat ambiguous. So, on the one hand, we would like to solve the nuclear crisis in Korea. And so if there's an agreement that North Korea will give up all its weapons and not test ballistic missiles, and in return, South Korea gives North Korea a lot of economic aid, and the U.S. gives North Korea security guarantees, and Russia and China and Japan have some role in this process. That's obviously
Richard, do you think that there's going to be major breakthroughs for the thaw in the relationship? Do you think there's going to be denuclearization in its serious sense as a result of the current momentum, the growing momentum in the inter-Korean relationship? Because President Moon Jae-in vows to go ahead with a reconciliation, if not a Sanxian policy.
Right, and so basically that's where we'd like to end up. But this is the part I was going to say about where the ambiguity comes in. The U.S. fears, and I think rightly, that the North Koreans are trying to divide the United States from South Korea and basically make a deal with South Korea in which there'll be economic cooperation, there'll be social cooperation, and so on, but somehow the North Korean nuclear weapons stay. And then, as your question correctly implied, the U.S. the Moon administration is going to be torn because it will want to have good relations with North Korea, but the U.S. is going to pressure them to stand fast on the nuclear issue. And so for the U.S., the nuclear issue is most important. For some South Koreans, it's not. And I think that's where it's going to get complicated. But for now, it's okay. But as this goes forward, you could see divisions arising.
Well, both Emmanuel Macron, French President, and Prime Minister Theresa May came over to visit China in the hope of revitalizing their lackluster economic performance. However, there have been some allegations that Prime Minister May has slowed down the pace of building, the golden era that characterizes the new relationship in the wake of David Cameron. What do you make of the overtones of some kind of a slowdown?
Exactly. Firstly, I took a note of the Minister Wang answered the question from European media about the China-Europe relations. So firstly, I would like to say that the China-Europe relations are as good as possible, especially if we compare with it before, especially recent years. Exactly this year, as we know, the President Macron and Prime Minister May paid a visit to China. Of course, now I think that now the big problem now for China-Europe relations is there are so huge change, happened in European countries, especially the Brexit. So far, it's full of the uncertainties, not only on the side of UK and also on the side of European Union. Especially recent days, we find out a very tough, attitude with each other between Brussels and London. So yes, I think now I understand that to compare with the former Prime Minister, Mr. Cameron, I think that Madam May faced a lot of challenges, because the first, the main problem now for her is how to deal with the Brexit, very tough issue. At the same time, because now she is running a weak government, especially after the snap election in the last year. So she has to deal with, a Brexit issue firstly, and then she had a weak, position on some sensitive issue or on some difficult issue like promoting China-UK relations. So I think that it's not so reasonable to take a comparison between Madam May and Mr. Cameron on the policy towards China. But finally, I think that the decisive factors for China-UK relations will be the structural, a kind of a common interest for both two sides. Once the UK leaves from European Union, undoubtedly there will be more requirement, more demand from UK towards China in trade and investment and some other. So I do have a very optimistic expectation for these better relations in future.
You raised the important question. That's about European understanding of what the Chinese initiative called the Belt and Road is up to. It's quite unfortunate that what we may call the old Europe, the old members of EU, the original members of EU.
That's the version of Rumsfeld,
okay.
former Secretary
the original members of
the
EU.
Old part of Europe.
They view the Chinese effort in terms of doing infrastructure, trade and investment with the Mediterranean and East Central Europe as a quote-unquote geostrategic or geoeconomic encroachment on Europe. That's very unfortunate. It really ought to be the area where earlier our guest in Washington, D.C. alluded to that too. In Eastern Central Europe and in the Mediterranean, that's where you need new investment capital, and you need to bring these places into new centers of production and consumption for an overall sluggish European economy. And that's where the original members of EU and China ought to be collaborating, or with other partners as well. So there are some structural issues here to look at, that is to say, and that's also true with the United States in terms of trade and investment. So far we are so stuck with single projects, with initiatives or everyday agendas of specific politicians. We need to go back to, especially against the background of the WTO not making much of a progress, to go back to look at the treaties, go back to look at the agreements, structural agreements like investment, trade, and also more and more so handling the human interactions like legal cooperation between our countries.
Thank you so much. Let me go back to Dmitry. Hi, there has been very strong and growing consensus between Moscow and Beijing on the issue of multilateralism, the role of the United Nations, the Indo-Pacific strategy, or the Back to Asia policy of the Obama administration. Now, Foreign Minister Wang Yi was pouring praises on the solidarity and united front that was shared by Russia and China on almost all major issues. Having said this, this year will be very important for Russian politics because there's almost no doubt as to the campaign success of President Putin. His approval rating is unprecedented, unrivaled. Now, does that matter more for European politics or for the new era of your Indo-Pacific strategy, if you agree to call that way? Dmitry.
Well, I think that you're right. Putin's victory is almost certain, and it is mostly due to foreign factors. A lot of people in Russia are not quite happy with the liberal economic policies that have been conducted in Russia in the last 25 years, even before Putin came to power, and Putin basically continued the liberal economic course. So a lot of people are not quite happy with that, but the desire of the United States and of the EU to oust Putin was so obvious that a lot of people are going to vote for him out of protest, basically, especially after the Olympic Games, when the strategy of the West was so cynical and so clear to humiliate the Russian athletes in order to have Russians vote against Putin. That was so obvious that it basically had an adverse effect to the desired one. But talking about the consequences of Putin's victory, I think if you look at Putin's foreign policy, he avoids conflict where he can avoid it. So I think Putin will not make a choice between India and China, even though he is seemingly forced to do that because of certain differences between India and China, which are impossible to hide. The United States seems to have chosen India. Russia will never say outright whom it supports in this rivalry. Russia will keep supporting cooperation on all fronts. If you look very closely, unlike Mr. Trump, the Russian foreign policy specialists, they never single out countries as enemies. We speak about concerns, we speak about risks, we speak about misunderstandings, but we never say that this or that country is a potential enemy.
Dmitry, we understand that it's no easy job for Moscow to make a clear choice between India and China with regard to the differences or even geopolitical disputes in the Asia-Pacific region. However, do you agree that when Democrats and Republicans in the D.C. are getting pretty tough on China, taking China as a strategic competitor, Moscow is quietly very happy because that will help derail their hostile agenda about Moscow?
You are absolutely right that basically Moscow is helped in its desire to get closer to China by the policies of the United States. In fact, I think President Obama was a real disaster for the United States in that sense. I would call him anti-Nixon because Nixon was a genius of politics. We know this expression, Nixon in Beijing. He managed for the first time in 100 years to have China and the United States basically on one side of the barricades in their mutual rivalry with the Soviet Union. Obama undid it in a matter of few years. Basically, if you remember, when we had a real bad conflict over Ukraine, Russia and the United States, Putin was planning a visit to Beijing, And Mr. Obama was, I'm sorry, unprofessional enough to visit all of China's rivals right before Putin's visit to Beijing. He visited the Philippines, he visited Vietnam. Everywhere, Mr. Obama said that the United States was going to support these countries against China. So as a result, Putin managed to sign this long postponed gas delivery deal, oil and gas deal with China to the tune of $400 billion. That deal had been postponed for so many years due to price issues. And basically, I think China and Russia were helped in overcoming their differences by the policies of the United States. So I agree with you on that completely. But coming back to India, as I said, Russia doesn't want to make a choice between India and China. We won't make the choice. We will not support any of the sides in their disputes.
Well, thank you so much. We understand very well the Moscow concern, the Russian concerns on India and the subcontinent of South Asia. Pretty soon, we're going to have the summit meeting on the sidelines of SCO conference in Qingdao, coastal city of Shandong province. Following the document crisis, which lasted for 73 days in 2017, leaders on both sides are determined to go ahead in the correct direction and mend the ties. So what do you think will happen in Qingdao?
Well, I cannot predict exactly what will happen, but it does seem to me the Indian leadership is, positioning itself strategically through, like this year, it's restricting the activities of the Dalai Lama group in India, where the Dalai Lama group is celebrating its 60th year in exile, but India is making it clear the government does not want any part of it. Between the two countries, China and India, we have, let's say, real, not just geostrategic, we have real territorial disputes. But I would think we have to look at the other side of the coin too. That is to say, China continues to be the largest trading partner of India. We have certain levels of competition, including overlap of products. But nevertheless, very few people recognize that. We used to, we had a strategic dialogue with the United States on economic matters. The next country we have that same dialogue is India.
Right, you're right. Well, let me go back to Richard. We got a clear sign from the Indian media, an article for the Hindu, a very influential newspaper that enjoys large circulation in India, says a proposed conference that's going to address the concern of China-Pakistan economic corridor, and therefore a meeting that would deliver a very unfriendly message about the issue of Kashmir has been postponed indefinitely to show a friendly sign and to lay groundwork for an improvement of the relationship on the sidelines of the Qingdao SCO conference. The United States may not be very happy about the breakthrough in this relationship between the dragon and elephant. What do you think?
Well, I think that just as Russia wants to not have to alienate India as it improves ties with China, so I think the Chinese in general do not want to alienate India as they pursue ties with Pakistan and so on. I mean, the U.S. position has been in flux. I think initially President Trump came in with the idea that Dmitry did, that U.S. policy had been driving Russia and China together, and so President Trump wanted to improve relations with Russia to slow down that process. But as we know, that has not worked out, and so the current U.S. strategy.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. We're going to sign off. We're going to conclude this very enlightening discussion about China's foreign policy and the major power relationship. Thank you for being with us. I'll see you next time tomorrow for Voices and Votes, our special program on Liang Hui. Until then, goodbye.